Welcome to Between Two Clinicians, the podcast that gives you a backstage pass into the mind of two therapists. I'm Talia.
I'm Luke. We've spent years helping others navigate the complexities of their minds and relationships.
In this podcast, we're flipping the script, and we're sharing our own unfiltered insights. No topic is off limits, and no issue too taboo. We're ready to tackle the tough stuff with honesty and empathy. Let's dive in. Truly thank God that we are both therapists.
Absolutely. I'm all in. Like it's funny because people always think like therapist lives are so perfect. It's like, let me let you know. It's not. No. We're dealing with all the stuff you're dealing with. We just know the big words to use with them.
And like, truly, this is not like a contest when I say this. Truly, sometimes it's worse when you know all the big words, when you're trained in this, because it's a level of feeling like this shouldn't be happening, or I shouldn't be having to deal with this. Like I'm trained in helping others avoid this. How the fuck did I get myself into this?
Yeah. It's like in your off time, you realize you walked into the dark forest.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, no.
I had the map leading me away from here, but I can't resist. So today we will be talking about something that is trending, which immediately when I read it, I was like, yes, that's the topic. What are deal breakers? And Adam and I are going to dive into, what they are, like how to define them and identify them, what some of them are. Maybe we can share our own personal ones or what we've seen come up with like clients, and then how do you navigate it when they come up? And there's a lot to unpack today, and then we'll do a hot seat at the end if we have time for one of our cute questions. So let's dive right in. I like to define deal breakers as the relationship will not continue past that point, and if it does, it will be so lopsided, mischaracterized, not the same as it used to be, that you won't really even be in a real relationship with that person anymore. It's just going to be like a watered down, negotiated rate version of that relationship. And it's better the reason why that happens is also the reason why it's better to have your deal breakers flown out from the beginning, like let them fly out on a flag so people know. And it's easier that you let the other person know and put them on notice, so that if they do come up, then you are able to end it before getting too attached potentially. So that's kind of my like little spiel of what are the touch points I'm going to go on today. So I'd be curious, how do you define a deal breaker?
I mean, very similar. I've always found deal breakers to be actions, behaviors, or events that are going to irreparably change the relationship. So the relationship is not going to survive in its current form. Very rarely do I find a deal breaker pop up and the relationship then continues forward in a mutually beneficial position. Normally, we move into a position of managed decline. So I'm okay with navigating, or I've accepted this deal breaker, but now I'm going to accept less from my spouse or significant other or this individual who brought this sort of into the relationship.
Yeah, I also think when a deal breaker comes up, so I think maybe like giving a list of some of them rather. I know some of them that have come up personally and professionally over my decades of life would be cheating, substance use, family involvement, either like too much or not enough from especially the couples that I've worked with. Sexual intimacy is a tricky one because it's not usually if this happens, like also how I define a deal breaker thing is important. It's like if this happens with anybody, like these are my totally unattached. This is the best time to identify your deal breakers as we're listing them, is when you are not attached to a person at all, because that is when you'll be the most genuine with yourself. You're in a relationship with yourself at that point. What are we, me and self, unwilling to tolerate, which means to interact with and still have respect for either ourselves or the other person. From that list, you write your deal breakers, like cheating. If this happened with anyone, and no matter the kind of cheating, what have you, I must be done with the relationship. If substance use, whatever, to this level or at all occurs, if family involved, like what you're doing when you're conceptualizing it, everybody has different deal breakers. Obviously, I want you to share yours too. Like everybody has what they feel is a deal breaker. However, when emotions and attachment get involved, sometimes we renege and we're like, but it wasn't really that bad though. Like it was just, 20 drinks. It wasn't 24 drinks or whatever it is. We start
Yeah.
justifying it and rationalizing it when in reality, you have to go back to like quote unquote sober, unattached use list who's like, no. And you will usually never, I try not to use that word, never be in the worst position if you choose to end it based on those deal breakers because you were of sound mind when you wrote the list. When you're in love, you're on drugs. You're not of sound mind. You're probably not going to be
Absolutely.
making the best decisions for yourself because you're in partnership, and it's a quite the conundrum. So, what are some
Well,
other deal breakers?
we can
Yeah,
walk down the line
yeah.
there of like, am I really in love or am I in lust? Because like
Or am I just attached?
if I'm just in
Yeah,
an extremely physically rewarding relationship, then yeah,
right, right, right.
those are sort of the like beer goggles
Yeah,
that like all of a sudden skew my ability to navigate. Like, well, is this actually what I want to get into? So the thing about deal breakers is we don't talk about them till it's too late.
yep.
Very few times do we actually set out good boundary work. So if you
Mm-hmm.
want to like sort of correlate anything in your head, deal breakers are normally driven by poor boundary work.
Yes,
And
yes.
so, like, that's why when you're in a relationship, you do need to be crystal clear in what you're willing to accept because we get
Mm-hmm.
into this like drift aspect of like, well, maybe you go to a party, they actually get like blasted, they're in
Yeah,
oblivion, but
yeah.
you drag them home, you hold their head above the toilet, all this good stuff. And then they're like, oh, so you co signed it. So you're in for that. And
Mm,
you're like, well, no, I thought that was just like a Saturday night. And they're like, no, that's me all the time. But you were willing to say, oh, yeah, he just gets drunk
yeah.
when I go out with him or
Yep.
with her or whatever it might be. So I always say, like, when deal breakers pop up, it shouldn't be a surprise to both of you. Like it should be articulated at some point. And that's why I always like to work from the spot of like, even in a relationship that is a collaborative thing, you still have a tremendous amount of control. And
Yes.
so I'm never willing to actually lay down that control and say that I
Mm-hmm.
am helpless or hopeless in a situation. So, uh, what ends up happening is if I keep reinforcing that boundary and you keep abusing that boundary, then it's not so much a surprise that this was a deal breaker. It's the fact that we had some sort of agreement that this was how we were going to behave as a couple or as individuals when we weren't together. And you decided to move past that. So I
Mm-hmm.
didn't entrap you. You
No.
chose to do something different.
Yeah. And I think for deal breakers that aren't as specific, like, or as, I guess, universal, common knowledge, what have you, is
Mm-hmm.
like cheating is typically, I would say, more often than not, if you said, would that be a deal breaker? More often than not, somebody,
Oh,
if you
yeah.
surveyed 100 people, majority would say yes. They might have different operational definitions. That's
Mm-hmm.
each their own. Also important to delineate, just like what is the role of a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, spouse, what have you. Because sometimes people they want a girlfriend more than they want to be a boyfriend, or
Ah, well
they
said.
want they want a relationship more, or like they want a kid more than they want
Mm-hmm.
to be a dad, right? Like there's a differentiation
Mm,
of like, I think we're on the same page, they're definitely not on the same fucking page.
no.
And so you're like, but we don't do that. And they're like, no, of course we would do that. Like, of course I'm going to be texting other women, or of course I'm going to be drinking on the weekends, or of course I'm going to be whatever that you think I
Yeah.
shouldn't, because in my mind, boyfriends or husbands do that, or
Mm-hmm.
like wives or girlfriends do that. And in your mind, they don't. So deal breakers can be what you wish you would have known sooner because you wouldn't have ever started the relationship in the
Absolutely.
first place. And they could also be something that comes up over the course of time that maybe they change their mind on something, and that could equally give pause or
Mm,
concern. Like let's say we met at church or whatever, and we're like, oh, we're
yeah.
both going to be the same faith. And then 2 years in, they're like, I want to be a Wiccan. I want to be an atheist. I want to be a Buddhist, whatever it is that goes so against what you were creating a life
Yeah.
for. And if that's a deal breaker for you, they're probably not going to go back to, they're telling you they're not going to go
Mm-hmm.
back to what they were. The person you were in a relationship with is dead. They
Yeah.
no longer exist. You have to, obviously, I'm being blunt because that's kind of just my delivery on some of this, but truly, I needed to hear this too when I was deliberating on some deal breakers. That version is never coming back.
Mm-mm.
They are not coming back. They have made choices that are showing you who they really are. And Neil Strauss has this quote that's like,
Mm.
their partner hasn't changed. They've just gotten more comfortable showing you who they really are. Believe
Boom.
them. When there is something that happens more than once,
Yeah.
up to 3 times, so there's that sweet spot of like, if it
Mm-hmm.
happens once and then it never happens again, probably not a pattern. And the person is truly repentant, and let's say it's a deal breaker of yours, and they do that, but
Yeah.
they're like, I know I messed up. please let me prove it to you that I won't do it again, and they never do it again. I think couples like that can get past it. But if they're like, I know you said that this thing, they basically hear your list of deal breakers and go, okay, now I have an entire list of how to mess with them and hurt them. That's the kind of person you want to run from, because they use
Yeah.
that almost as like, and that is very common with more pathologically narcissistically traded people. I work with a lot of clients who are recovering from those kinds of relationships, and they're every session, I just don't know how this person could do this to me. I would never do that to somebody else. Like, it obviously messes with your mind. I said, because to them, that's normal behavior. It would be more
Absolutely.
odd if they treated you the way that you expected to be treated than how they actually treated you. And I know it's hard to let go of the idea that people should or shouldn't be a certain way. That's all the more reason to stay strong with your deal breakers. If somebody mistreats you, if somebody doesn't have your back, or if they talk about you behind your back, if they use verbal abuse with you, chances are that's not the only time they're going to do it. And chances are, if you found out, it's not the first time it happens, it's the first time they got caught. Learned that when I was going through treatment when I was in high school.
Yeah.
And because so many of the parents are like, but my little Johnny's perfect. And they go, no, he's not. This is the first time he smoked weed. Really? You think the first time he smoked weed landed him in a treatment center? Probably not. Like, the first time he got caught. So you have to keep that in mind with deal breakers too. If one occurs in your relationship, did the person come to you and disclose it? Did they share, hey, or even if they didn't know it was a deal breaker, right? Like, let's say cheating is more of the commonly known one that we don't really address because we assume we're on the same page, and they come to you and they're like, I messed up. Whatever, it was a moment of weakness. Whatever their reasoning is, I want to get help. I understand if you want to break up. I just know I'm getting help. If there's anything I can do to repent, like if they come to you like that, there are couples and relationships, you and I know this from betrayal work, that can move past that. If, on the other hand, it's discovered, it's hidden, it's not disclosed, it's disclosed years later or what have you, that's a big red flag and a deal breaker all wrapped into one. It's a big red deal breaker because that person cannot be trusted. The reason why repair after deal breakers sometimes works is because the person, out of their own volition, says, I know I messed up. I would like to make it right. I'm only human. I don't intend to do it more than once, is totally different than, I was just kind of a loose suggestion to treat you the way you wanted to be treated. I don't really want to do that.
Well, a lot of times we need to try to step away from co-signing each other's deal breakers. And I know that, like, so that's maybe a complicated way of saying it, but they're the deal breaking behavior. We take passive ways of co-signing it. So, like, I appreciate you bringing it up with, whether it's sexual betrayal, affairs, pornography, whatever it might be. I see this a lot in my work where, again, there's a spouse that inevitably was uncomfortable with like pornography being brought into the relationship, but it wasn't necessarily voiced or pinpointed. Like, I knew that when he was taking longer showers, that's what he was doing. I knew when he sort of locked himself in his home office, that's what he was doing. But then I have certain secondary gains that I benefited from that. Like, it was nice that he would isolate, leave me alone. It was nice that I was freaking exhausted taking care of all these kids, and I wasn't getting bugged by it. But then inevitably comes to the side of like where we want the emotional, physical connection back in the relationship. And all of a sudden, my partner has trained themselves to have a sexual relationship with their phone. And this is where it's like, we can't muddy the waters. We can't use the secondary gains of toxic behaviors, even when sometimes they feel like they work out for us.
True.
Because there were times that, like, I've worked with individuals that say, yeah, my spouse started working later in the evenings. It was a freaking joy. I could clean the house. I could take everything down. I could, I had time for myself. And then, oh, here's the affair. And I think that it's wrong for us to move into the spot of like, well, my gosh, you didn't see it coming, because it really shows just the level of fatigue that we were both in.
True.
Like, yeah, a part of me that would have had a greater mental load capacity could have probably put it together, but I was also in survival mode. And so how do you actually then identify or define them? I think a lot of times when I'm sitting down with couples and we're in betrayal work is I'll hear from the non-offending spouse that they were putting the timeline together, but they were never talking about it. It was like, yeah, I saw you like certain people on Instagram, or I saw that like I was catching you scrolling scanty clad women on Instagram, but I didn't want to bug you, so I didn't say anything, right? Well, I'm not saying that you have to manage this other person's behaviors. That's all their stuff. They have to take care of that. But in you not saying it, you're also telling yourself you don't have a position to have the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you
Mm-hmm.
trying to manage? You're literally trying to manage like this rotting relationship. It's like, how
Mm-hmm.
long can we keep it on ice before it breaks apart?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how am I? One of my mom's best lines was, "How long do you do CPR on a dead body? Like before you have to call time of death?" And
Mm-hmm.
there's people who are doing CPR, and it's like 2 years past time of death, and everybody else is looking at the clock like, "Are we
Yeah.
seeing this?" And the person's just like, "Maybe if we just go to one more counseling session,
Well,
maybe if they just."
there's a hysterical scene in Deadpool and in
Yes,
Wolverine
yes,
of like
yes.
this, just like this dead body. Like, what am I gonna do with the skeleton, right? Like, but this is all that's available to me.
Mm-hmm.
And there are literally people that then decide, well, I'm gonna go into the fight of life and
Mm-hmm.
use the dead body. And
Yep.
it's like that should be a moment of pause for us to recognize, like, wait a second, no, this is when you say that makes me uncomfortable. And this
I'm
is what
done.
I try to tell with all my relationship work is like, if your spouse is going to react unfavorably because you're telling them, hey, this is going to cause me to resent you, it's already dead.
Yeah, you're
Like
done
there's
already.
there's nothing left there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to say it cold hearted. It's just this is the
No, it's
reality of
true.
it. If my wife comes to me and says, hey, that is causing me to have resentment against you, that's causing me to question myself, that's causing distance in the relationship I have with you, if that's not of a concern to you,
Mm-hmm.
then we've got some questions, because obviously this relationship isn't a priority to you. And
Mm-hmm.
this is the other aspect, is people like, oh, it's a deal breaker. Well, these deal breakers show up when you've moved into a partner, like into a business relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That's when people are like, oh, I didn't know that was going to be a problem. You didn't think that drinking till 3 o'clock in the morning and then driving home drunk was going to be a problem.
In what world would it not be? Hey there, listeners. Are you tired of settling for less than you deserve in your relationships? Do you ever feel like you're not being seen, heard, or valued the way that you want? Or maybe you've been wondering why you keep attracting the same kinds of people into your life, or why certain patterns seem to repeat themselves in your relationships. The answer might be deeper than you think, and you can find it in my new course. Rewire Your Relationships is a transformative course designed to help you stop settling for less than you deserve and start embodying your most confident, assertive, and authentic self in your relationships. You'll explore how your early experiences and parental influences have shaped your views on love, dating, and self-worth. This isn't just about tips and tricks for dating. It's about understanding the core beliefs that drive your relationships that you attract. You'll learn how to break free from those old patterns and start creating the kind of connections that truly reflect who you are. Imagine stepping into a relationship with clarity and confidence, knowing you're attracting people who value and respect you for who you really are, your deeply authentic self. The Rewire Your Relationship course gives you the tools to rewrite your relationship story, one where you're no longer settling, but thriving. Visit taliabombola.com/rewireyourrelationships or check the link in the show notes for more. Also, then I think when you were saying it, what came up for me is kind of that question of why do people participate in looking past a deal breaker, if you can word it
Mm-hmm.
that way, or like why do we
Mm-hmm.
collude with allowing it? And there's two pieces at least that jump to mind. I'm sure there's more. The top two that came to my mind are, one, no particular order, but one, we are sold and bought a false narrative of like true love means, and 50 to 75 years of marriage, like you have to work through hard shit and you have to put
Mm-hmm.
up with this, and how many times did you forgive one another in this? Then you also have to look at societal history. Women didn't have their own bank accounts. Women weren't allowed to vote. Women didn't have their own line of credit. Of course they had to put up with all this shit to stay, because they literally couldn't have without the guy. We are no longer, within a matter of 50 years, all that has changed. We are no longer in that era anymore where you
Mm-mm.
have to put up with all of this negative stuff that tears you down as a person for the sake
Mm.
of, and back in the day it was true, not like worth-wise they would be nothing, but they were not seen in society. Single parents or divorcees were not seen the way that they are now. There
No.
was such a societal stigma that kept people looking past deal breakers. So then
Mm-hmm.
you add in, I guess 1A for me would be the generational narratives. Well, you, in this family we don't get divorced, you stick and work through it, you this, mixed with probably their own feelings of like, oh my God, I totally considered divorce, but I never could have done that. And I don't want to be the
Mm.
only one. So I'm going to make them go and feel how I feel, rather than giving them the permission to be like, yeah, you should leave if you're being treated poorly or the person exhibits a deal breaker. So you mix the societal and generational conditionings in with the narrative of, I want a one true love. Like last episode, person's my soulmate.
Mm,
Potentially not, though. They could be like a trauma bond. Like, I want to give it my all. And we think, especially women, if I just love them, if I just keep going back, if I just make these concessions, if they know how I feel, if they this, then they'll change for the greater good, because we see this vision of what we want the love to be. When in reality, you're teaching them directly and indirectly exactly how much abuse or mistreatment or disrespect you can take and not leave. And there's no Girl
yeah.
Scout badge or Olympic gold medal for being broken down in a relationship to the point where, and I was even, I will use self-disclosure, I was even looking back, trying to process an IFS and EMDR in my own counseling, a line that I will never forget that I said. I was like weeping in the couples therapist's office postpartum in the thick of it. And I forget exactly the question the therapist had asked, but what I remember was weeping and sitting there feeling like all ages of me at the same time,
Mm,
and saying, or she said, "What does that mean about you?" She wasn't saying it in a demeaning way. She was,
yeah.
psychoanalytically exploring. And I said that I don't have enough self-worth to leave someone who abused me.
Mm,
And then I was like, oh no, sis, like we're not doing that. No, like we got to change that narrative. And working on that and hypnotherapy and everything else allowed me to unpack and go, oh, I looked past deal breakers because I had this long vision and I had always loved me, minus letting someone disrespect me. But like my love towards myself was always the loyal, steadfast love. The love I gave was always the loyal, steadfast love. So of course I like giving that. I felt good to give that. Of course I would want to keep participating in that. It was all encompassing, and other relationships
mm,
too, of why I looked past some of the things was like, well, what if they change? And the
yeah.
story, how many times do you see that too? Why people look past deal breakers? Well, I'm not going to spend all this time with this person and they're going to treat the next person right. Maybe, maybe not. And
Mm,
maybe they don't treat the next person the way that they treated you. But like you said, you can't ever see them in another light. So you actually, even if you kept with them and like quote unquote took them back or what have
yeah.
you, you will never see the version of them, even if they truly become it, because there's so much damage and betrayal that clouds you seeing them in that
Hmm.
way. If big caveat, even if they do change or if it's even sustainable, you will never get that because you
Yeah.
are too marred. I was like that too. You only got the shitty version of them.
Well,
That
and
good
you,
version is not coming back, and I hope that they change so no one else gets hurt by
oh,
that person.
absolutely. Like, that's the thing. We can always hope that they end up becoming the best version of
Yeah.
themselves, regardless of me being in their life still. But to
Mm-hmm.
your point, like, even if you try to make this work, I get into the position of asking, well, how's it going to be living with a bulletproof vest?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're never going to really, I hate using the word never, but it's going to be very difficult for you ever get into a position of vulnerability with someone that you do not actually trust. Like, and so this is when we get into that, like, okay, what's the managed decline? What am I willing to accept? And this is just a race to the bottom because that's going to be a constant negotiation. It's not going to stop. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
be okay. So this and this and this until this person has basically gotten them to a position where they have all their secondary gains met. They have all their dopamine rushes, and you're now more of a janitor slash cruise director in their life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's why I say, like, sometimes we have to recognize when deal breakers are there. It's more important for me to raise my hand and say no, I can't go forward, than trying to trick myself into the thought process of it'll be easier for me to say nothing.
Mm-hmm. Or I can look past it, or like you used earlier, the wording like to justify it or rationalize it
Mm-hmm.
almost. And I think using your rational mind list of what are your deal breakers is a good exercise to get out of it. That's
Yeah.
like the meme, like leave after the first red flag. I won't, but you guys should, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I get it. Like trust me, you know too. Like I personally and professionally empathize with this. A good litmus test. So even if you are, this is like a theme on social media. So take it for a grain of salt. I'm not trying to be heteronormative. It's the my husband would never.
Yeah.
And this is like that viral trend that was going around a while ago. Like if you're dating somebody and they're not treating you well, or they're treating you in a way,
Mm,
like do that test of like my husband would never. And if the person that you are with, if you never would want to be treated like that, let's say you are married too, like
yeah.
there has to be a foot put down, and it's going to be done by the person who is getting hurt, usually not by the person doing the hurting, especially if they have no remorse or they've done it multiple times and it is a pattern. What do they have to gain except losing their supply by putting their
Mm,
foot down? If you are the recipient of that behavior and you are consistently violating your own boundaries for the sake of love, attachment, the kids, what have you, don't. Truly, like, put your foot
Yeah.
down and be like, this ends with me. This ends with this lineage. No matter how long we've been together, no matter how many things we have under our belt or what have you, none of that is worth putting up with the deal breakers where
Yep.
you not only will see that person in a negative light eventually, unfortunately, you will start to see yourself in a negative light. And when you can look in the mirror and be like, I know that we're better than this, what are you doing?
Mm,
Before that, please leave. But as soon as you have that moment, please leave, because it is not worth
bail.
staying past those deal breakers. You're going to break. Like, the other person is
Because your mental
gaining.
load is 10
Yes.
tenths. Like
Yes.
that's something you and I have had more conversations about, is like
Mm-hmm.
managing our mental loads.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because here's the thing, you cannot work out and out scheme the fact that you can't control this other person.
Correct.
So like I use a phrase with my couples, let your spouse surprise you, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
here's the crazy thing is like the surprises are going to continue to come in. And so you're going to sit here and you're going to scheme your whole life on this is how we can make it work and this will be fine. And that's all if this person follows your rules or your train of thought.
Mm-hmm.
But has this person ever done that? Probably not.
True.
So like you're basing the assumption on how you're going to make this work based off of their level of engagement
Mm-hmm.
to making it work. So this, just to reference one more thing, is like we get stuck in this loop where we of course the thought leaves my head as soon as I've got it set up, but here it's coming back, the train's rolling back into station. We have these situations where our significant other like breaks our heart, something happens, right? And we move quickly into this positioning of not repair, but the like concealment, the dismissing, the
Mm-hmm.
compartmentalization. Why? Because we take the like whole picture we're sitting in, and we're talking about kids, or we're talking about incomes, we're talking about a house, we're talking about this life we've built together, and all of a sudden we go to preserving that, and we don't include in that like analysis ourselves. Like, you are not a consumable in this process. But so many of us are willing to jump to, well, how do we protect this? Some things aren't designed to be conserved. Like, there's no
True.
conservation that's going to happen based off the fact that you do not have a willing participant. When you talked about people back in the 50s or
Mm-hmm.
40s that stuck together and were married for all those years, I take a little bit different spin on it. Yes, I know that there was a lot of institutional barriers for women. I
Mm-hmm.
also believe that we were in a different dynamic as a society where most people wanted their relationships to work out.
I agree. That's a good point.
I don't think most people were in this thought process of, I can have as many relationships as I want. Maybe there was still societal pressures on that, because like the womanizing man was a big theme that came out of like the 40s and the 50s, and the drunkard and stuff like that.
True.
So the difference is, we had more people that were willing to work in the discomfort and the vulnerable and make things work for the betterment of all that were involved than we do now. This isn't
Mm-hmm.
putting it on any one person. It's just the
Right.
fact that we're surrounded by distractions. So
True.
if I'm sitting trying to have a conversation, let's say I leave a conversation with my wife that I'm frustrated at, right? Like, I can't believe her. I jump on Instagram and I've got Tits McGee in my face.
Right.
All of a sudden it's like, well, shit, look at all these. I love the joke. I opened my email and I found an email about hot singles in my area wanting to meet me. Like,
Yeah.
there's like,
Yeah.
you're
I
constantly
remember
in
that
this
one. Yeah.
spot of like, oh yeah, see? And this is the lie. This
Yeah.
is the distraction. This is the like, oh, I could move on and I
It's
could
an
get better.
illusion.
And what we do is we just find other people with similar trauma bonds and let our
Mm-hmm.
demons play while they destroy us. Like, so here's what I always tell a partner: if you feel like you're unequally yoked, if you feel like someone isn't going to fight for this relationship with you, bail. There's nothing else you need to do. You don't,
Yep.
there's no virtue in
No.
turning yourself into, and I'll probably get some bad feedback on this, but I say like the crazy bitch merit badge has no virtue. Like,
True.
don't let a person push
It's
you.
gender neutral. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
think crazy bitch merit badge is completely a gender neutral term for the sake of
Exactly.
this. Yeah.
That's why I said
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
said, whatever
Yeah.
person this, don't
Mm-hmm.
let a person push you into
Mm-hmm.
becoming the neurotic individual. Because
No.
I
And don't
actually
go
have a love.
crazy trying to prove you're not crazy. That's the
Exactly.
ironic part, is like, it's not until you have to list out to other people or your therapist or shelter or a
Yeah.
lawyer or whoever, that it's like, well, why do you want whatever you're asking for protection or for whatever?
Mm-hmm.
And you list it and you're like, oh my God, I cannot believe I ever put up with any of that. It's not
Yep.
until the fog lifts sometimes. And that's obviously an extreme example compared to like you're dating a few months in
Yeah.
and somebody exhibits a deal breaker. If that wasn't already apparent in this episode, the earlier you can list the deal breakers out to the other person and
Yeah.
not tell them as like, here's how I want you to treat me. It's if this happens, I will be
Mm-hmm.
leaving. So you're listing your ultimatums out soon. And the person then knows. You don't then dive all in, assuming they either will or will not do that. You get reasonably close as the time goes on. You get reasonably attached per how much you're vulnerable with
Yeah.
one another. And if a deal breaker comes up, you don't take it personally. There's nothing you could have done more of or less of for that to happen. That person's behavior is their personal accountability to
Mm-hmm.
take responsibility for or not. And you
Yep.
say, I'm following through on my word to myself. Thank you for letting me know that whatever you cheated, you this, you that. I wish you all the best. It's not going to be
Mm-hmm.
with me. And you pack whatever it
Exactly.
is, metaphorically or literally, and you leave because you
Yep.
will more like it's better, honestly, sometimes to look back and go, shoot, I wish I would have stayed with that person past that.
Mm,
If that you see him with somebody else and you're also
yep.
free to move on, then years later and so much trauma later, look back and go, I should have left then. Like it's better to
Mm,
actually leave and regret leaving and look back and be like, I should have left sooner.
yeah. No, I mean, great points. So if I could talk to, and I will be heteronormative, if I could talk to every woman that was speaking right now, like, or
Mm-hmm.
listening, what I would encourage you is like, I sit with 99% of my female individuals.
Mm-hmm.
They will come out of the gate saying porn was never on the table, but it was never
Mm-hmm.
talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have every right when you get into a relationship, if you are not happy with the use or
Or
consumption of
comfortable.
porn,
Mm-hmm.
that needs to be like first date. I'm sorry.
Truly.
I know that
No,
people are
no,
like,
you we
"What?"
should be
But
telling
we
deal
should
breakers and
have
red flag, yeah, on first date minimum because you're not
absolutely.
attached. You're not attached to
Exactly.
the outcome
This
at that
it
point. You're
has
your
to
most
be a
real.
list.
Yes.
Like, I'm telling you, it should be in the conversation, and I know that it can be plugged in. It
Mm-hmm.
should be like, if you're going on a first date and you've already had the text conversation of like, I'm looking for a relationship, you
Mm-hmm.
need to then define a relationship. What is a relationship? This is what I'm looking at. I want to get into a relationship with a person who is not actively living life to excess. I don't need to be around a drunkard. I don't need to be around a stoner. And I don't need to be around someone who's using pornography. Because, like, I wish to be your object of attraction in this relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not willing to create space so the third wheel is pornography. Because, one,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter whether you're the female or the male in this when you have a hesitation towards porn, because you can never outwork porn. Like,
No.
that's the trouble with pornography, is it's
Mm-hmm.
extremely good at the most destructive things.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, it's okay for you to say this out loud. Like,
That
because
doesn't, yeah, that
I
doesn't
want the
work for me.
person to
Yeah.
ghost me. I want the person to
Yeah.
ghost me and be like, "Oh, whatever, this person's insane," and leave. Perfect.
Good.
Is right there. I've
Yeah.
already set the standard. Because, see, here's how pornography changes. We say, okay, well, whatever. Like, we weren't able to hook up this week. No problem.
Mm-hmm.
He'll take care of it.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, it's DMing women. All of a sudden, then it's like flirting at bars.
Yep.
Like, I
It
may take
ratchets up. Once the
yeah,
first sting of morality is gone, it ratchets up.
well, yeah, because you're not tethered to anything at that point. And
No.
so, like, I can hear a lot of people who are probably listening to this and saying, well, that's not true. I've watched porn and I've not done that. Have you done things where you've tried to hide them from your spouse? Have you tried to plan it so your spouse is out of the house or significant others out of the house
Mm-hmm.
so that you can wrap one off real quick? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's
Mm-hmm.
there this side is there, and sometimes that's the what blows me away is when I'm working with the offending spouse, and sometimes they can't even write that down. Like, my wife would never, or my husband would never,
Mm-hmm.
whichever one they would
Mm-hmm.
be,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because they're like, shit, like, it would be really easy, or it has been easy, or I've gotten myself to that hotel room once. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten myself close enough. I got on the elevator. I got to the parking garage. Like, this is the thing where these are deal breakers, and it's easy to go to pornography because I think it's visceral for everyone. But, like, if you have a problem with someone drinking, it needs to be a
Yeah.
part of the conversation. Like, hey, I love
Yes.
social drinks, but I'm not going to be your wet nurse. I'm not going to drag your
No.
ass home. If you make a fool out of yourself, I'm out. Now,
Yeah.
here's a challenge, though, is you have to hold yourself accountable to the words that you give.
And I have tips on how to do that. I don't know if you do.
I
That you want to
do.
share, obviously. Yeah.
I mean, here's the deal. As soon as you move into the spot of accepting less after you've told them this is the boundary,
Yeah.
you're screwed.
You're
It's
giving
the
them,
game over.
yeah, you're giving
Because,
them permission to treat you less because
Mhm.
how we treat ourselves is a model for how other people are allowed to treat us.
Yeah.
And yes, I've worked with this personally and professionally. It's not like some people don't want to end up alone in terms of the
Hmm.
abandonment, fear, loneliness. And some people are like, no, I actually have a lot going for me in my life.
Yep.
I have everything I want except someone to share it with. I don't want to go back to dating. Also a valid reason, not to put past deal
Absolutely.
breakers, but a valid reason to be like, was it really that bad? This and
Well,
that,
that's the hesitation.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
go,
That's the
I
hesitation.
got to start over. Like, I've been
Yeah.
polishing this turd for 6 months.
Speaking from experience, I guarantee you would rather start over after dating maybe 3 to 4 months, even a year, than years in,
Hmm.
having a child, etc. It's not worth it. It's leave at the first red flag, truly, and don't look back, because that person, if they don't change, you're better to be out of their life. And if they do change, good for the next person. You're already free to go find somebody who never exhibited that behavior. And the only way to truly avoid those deal breakers coming up is to pick somebody who's never exhibited it, period. It is just not in their ethos. It's not in the way that they view the world or themselves. Like, I'm a person where I would, obviously most people are like this. I would assume at some point there's people like this in
Yeah.
the world who are like, oh, that'd be, the impulse, the urges, whatever. And then you're like, but if so-and-so found out, or if I got caught, or this. And sometimes that is the reason why you choose
Yeah.
not to do things, right? Like, I don't look good in orange, I don't want to go sit in prison. But and I told that joke to my therapist, and she was laughing. I was like, I gotcha. I broke frame. It was so funny.
Yeah.
But it's like, sometimes the reason why you don't do something is because you don't want the negative outcome of it. And if you were unattached, if you weren't partnered, like going out and getting drunk and making out with somebody at a bar, if it's your choice, go for it. Doing that while you're in a relationship, don't go for it, right? Like, same behavior, different
Yep.
attachment is totally acceptable because it's not cheating. If you're single doing that, it's not cheating. If you're in a relationship doing that, it's cheating. And that's the delineation too of like, if you're not done doing that behavior, don't commit to somebody. Or if you're not done doing the behavior that, if it's in a relationship, would be a deal breaker, do not make a deal with somebody. Just avoid partnering entirely. And that would be, again, my other piece of advice is like, be clear about who you are and who you are not, how you want to be treated and how you do not want to be treated.
Absolutely.
And even if it is tough to start over at whatever point, do it. The start over is going to be so much better.
The difficulty of starting over after 3 or 4 or 6 months, whatever it is going to be exponentially less than when your lives are intertwined. And there are aspects where it's like, when a kiddo walks in through the door, like, we're in it for a lifetime now. Doesn't mean that you have to be in that relationship with them, but this person is going to be linked to you forever.
Yep.
So like, there's ways of having to say, okay, wait a second. The best way of making sure that deal breakers don't show up is having high thresholds. I don't mean having high thresholds in bullshit, like 6 foot
of
5
how much you can tolerate.
grand. Like, that's not it. It's about saying like, hey, I'm looking to get into a serious relationship. This is how serious I am about it. Like, these are the things that I can promise from me you're not going to experience. But these are also the things I need from another person to have the vulnerability, to have the emotional intimacy, to have that closeness. And what I'm saying is, like, if you find the person who wants to be in the relationship, they're going to be 100% like, oh my gosh, this is going to be like hearing everything I want to hear. The person that's like, oh, well, is there any negotiation? On to the next. Like, this isn't a fire sale. Okay, I don't have to make this work with you. And so if you're uncomfortable with it, I appreciate the honesty, and I'm going to find someone who's going to fill my cup to the capacity that I am looking for.
Yes. That's it. Don't break yourself in the process of the deal breaker. I think that's a good end note. And we have 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to drop a random question on. That's not a good one. Oh, this is good. What do people assume about you because of your appearance? Are they right or wrong? I just picked one randomly.
Most of the time people think I'm a truck driver. I get that like every time. Like, it's just funny. they just like, you're a therapist? Like, I thought you either like
Oh.
chase cows or
Mm-hmm.
drive them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
pretty much me.
Mine comes anecdotally from grad school. One of my friends at the time was like, I thought you were a bitch when I first met you. Because I have resting bitch face and I can't get Botox anymore because I'm immune. But then I've seen pictures of me where I'm just like stone face. I'm like, oh God, like he's right. Like I really do not look approachable. Part of it's by design because I have the tough exterior. So I think some people think if you know me in a certain way, I am as mean as that. But like some people think I'm meaner or bitchier than I am, but it's only really when you've crossed me. You know me, I'm Italian. Like I'll
Yep.
love you endlessly and then it's like mafia level. But the other part of it is I think for me, people assume because I was going to go into law enforcement instead of therapy. I've told so many therapy clients that they're like, I can see that. And I'm like, I'm sitting here as your therapist, as your licensed mental health professional sitting in front of you, and they're like, no, that's a much better fit. Like I can totally see that. Because it's the attitude. It's like it's the assertion, it's the,
Yep.
and my therapist was like, you have large balls. Like you really do. You have them out, like you are proud, you are that. And I'm like, not to be crass, but like metaphorically, I'm tough. So I do think people have that impression of me. But as you get to know me, like I am a softie. I'm very loyal and loving. I have like the pit bull exterior and the golden retriever interior. But
yeah,
I will be full pit bull if I need to,
So that's maybe a conversation we have to have for a different time because you have the alpha feminine.
Yeah.
Which means that you have to be met with a masculinity that allows you to be soft. Because if you aren't met,
it's a tall order.
Yeah, it is. I know it's a tall order, but it's not that we can't do it.
No, there'll be one. At least out of 8 million, what billion people, there's got to be one. Yeah, so that's my okay, kindly, if any of you have had impressions from like listening or watching or what have you, or if you think we would have a different profession, maybe that's a good neutral way. Like if you saw us, what profession would you think we would have?
Please comment. I can't wait to hear that.
I will filter though. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Between Two Clinicians. We would so appreciate if this episode resonated with you for you to share it with somebody, and also find your favorite podcast platform and like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast. We would love to attract more listeners just like you and have this message be spread to whoever needs it. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.